Sometimes, the way someone looks can cost them dignity, respect, even basic humanity. But what if that same person held more power than you ever imagined? This is the true story of a man wrongly judged by his skin color, and the powerful comeback that shocked everyone watching. Stay with us, because karma doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. It was a sunny afternoon when Marcus stepped into the upscale luxury store downtown. He had just finished a major meeting and decided to reward himself with a gift. Dressed in a clean designer shirt and polished shoes, he looked like any successful businessman. But to the store owner, none of that mattered. The moment Marcus walked in, the man's smile faded. He watched Marcus like a hawk, eyes full of suspicion, as if success and blackness couldn't exist together. Marcus noticed it, but stayed ca. As Marcus browsed through the shelves, the store owner whispered something to one of the staff. Moments later, a young clerk approached Marcus, pretending to be helpful but clearly watching his every move. "Can I help you with something?" "Sir," the clerk asked, emphasizing the word, sir, like it didn't belong to him. Marcus politely replied, "Just looking, thank you." But the atmosphere was thick with judgment. Other customers weren't being followed. They weren't being questioned. Marcus felt the. He picked up a sleek watch, one he had admired online for weeks. As he turned it in his hand, the store owner stormed over. "That piece is quite expensive," he said, his tone icy. Marcus looked him in the eye. "I know." But the man kept going. "If you're not buying, I'll have to ask you not to touch the merchandise." Gasps were heard from nearby shoppers. Marcus put the watch down gently, nodded, and said, "Understood." He walked out, head held high, heart heavy. He could afford the whole store. That night, Marcus sat in silence. Not with anger, but with purpose. He wasn't just a customer. He was a silent partner at one of the top fashion firms in the country. The same firm that had recently been in talks with this luxury brand for a collaboration. The irony was too sharp to ignore. With one call, he could change everything. But Marcus wasn't after revenge. He wanted something deeper. A lesson. A wake-up call. And he knew exactly how to deliver it. The next morning, Marcus returned, but this time, not alone. He was accompanied by 2 senior executives and a brand liaison from the fashion firm. All of them dressed sharp, oozing presence. The store owner didn't recognize him right away. "Good morning, gentlemen, how can I help you?" he asked, cheerful and fake. But when Marcus stepped forward, his smile faded fast. "We're here for the scheduled walkthrough," Marcus said calmly. "Didn't your assistant confirm our visit yesterday?" The owner. The staff looked confused. Customers began to take notice. Marcus walked through the store with authority, explaining how certain layouts could be optimized, how lighting could highlight the newer collections. The owner followed awkwardly behind, silent. "You see," Marcus said, turning to him, "you judged me yesterday based on what you saw. But what you didn't see is who I am." The silence that followed was heavier than the day before. And now, it was the owner who couldn't lift his head. As Marcus continued his walkthrough, he explained the store's weak points, things only an expert would notice. "We usually collaborate with brands that respect all clients," he said, pausing deliberately. The store owner tried to smile, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus leaned closer and whispered, "You didn't just judge a customer. You insulted a partner." The owner's face twitched, and for the first time, he realized just how badly he'd messed up. Customers were beginning to whisper. Some pulled out their phones, recording what felt like justice unfolding. The staff looked embarrassed. The same clerk who had questioned Marcus the day before kept his eyes down. Marcus stopped near the same watch he had once held. "We were going to feature this in our campaign," he said to his team. "But maybe this isn't the right store for our brand after all." The store owner panicked. "Wait, we can talk." Let's discuss this. But it was too late. We don't discuss integrity, Marcus replied. We live by it. With that, he turned to leave. His team followed, leaving behind a man whose arrogance had just cost him the biggest opportunity of his career. One of the employees tried to apologize on the owner's behalf, but Marcus only smiled kindly. You deserve better leadership, he said. Outside, the sun was bright, and so was the peace in Marcus's heart. He had shown grace and power. News of the encounter spread quickly. A few customers who had witnessed the event shared their videos online. Within hours, hashtags like #KarmaInLuxury and #RespectAllCustomers started trending. The store's online reviews flooded with criticism. Racism doesn't sell, one comment read. Marcus didn't say a word online. He didn't have to. The world had already decided who was wrong, and who had handled it like a true professional. Later that evening, Marcus received a call from the company's CEO. Not the store owner, but the man above him. We're sorry, he said. This doesn't reflect our values. Marcus listened quietly. The CEO offered to fire the manager and redo the deal. But Marcus declined. Respect isn't a transaction, he said. It's a culture. And with that, he ended the call. This wasn't about revenge, it was about awakening. And for Marcus, the mission was complete. That night, Marcus sat quietly by his window, sipping tea as city lights blinked below. He wasn't celebrating a victory, he was reflecting. He thought of how many others had walked into places like that and left feeling small, unworthy. Not everyone had the chance to walk back in with power. That's why his story mattered. It wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had been looked down on, judged, or mistreated because of the color of their skin. Meanwhile, the store's reputation continued to spiral downward. Influencers began calling it out. Former employees shared stories of similar incidents. Even loyal customers started turning away. The luxury brand tried to issue a public statement, but it came too late. The damage was done. If you can't treat all people with dignity, one blogger wrote, you don't deserve their money. The internet had spoken, and it was unforgiving. Marcus received dozens of messages, some from strangers who were moved by his quiet strength, and others from young black professionals who said, you gave us a voice. He responded to many of them, reminding them to never doubt their worth. You don't have to shout to be powerful, he messaged one student. Sometimes, standing in silence makes the loudest statement. His inbox was overflowing, but his heart was full. One morning, a young man approached Marcus in a coffee shop. Nervous, but determined, he said, I saw the video. That used to be me, afraid to walk into certain places. But not anymore. You showed me that we belong everywhere. Marcus smiled and offered a seat. They talked for an hour. That simple moment, a stranger finding courage through his story, meant more than any deal he had ever signed. This was the true reward. Days later, Marcus drove past the same store. It was quieter now. Fewer customers, fewer lights. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. That chapter was over. What mattered now was the ripple effect, how one act of calm resistance echoed far beyond its walls. He didn't seek revenge. He taught a lesson. He didn't raise his voice. He raised awareness. And in doing so, he reminded the world, never underestimate the dignity of a man who knows his worth. The following week, Marcus was invited to speak at a diversity and inclusion summit. He stood on stage, dressed simply, no flash, just presence. The audience went silent as he shared his story. No anger. No blame. Just truth. Change doesn't always come from the top, he said. Sometimes, it begins with the person who refuses to stay silent when they're disrespected. The applause wasn't loud, it was thunderous. His words struck deep. After the event, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She was the mother of a teenage boy who had been profiled in a mall recently. "You made me feel seen," she said. Marcus didn't speak, he just hugged her. Some victories aren't headlines or viral clips. They're quiet, personal, and sacred. That moment reminded Marcus that this wasn't just a story, it had become a movement. A silent revolution of dignity, spreading from heart to heart. Back at his office, Marcus placed the same watch, the one he had once admired, on his desk. He didn't buy it from the store. He ordered it from a different branch, one where he was treated with respect. The watch wasn't about wealth anymore. It was a symbol. A reminder of the moment he chose grace over rage. Power over pettiness. And how that choice changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone who watched it unfold. The racist store owner was eventually replaced. Not fired publicly, but moved for internal restructuring, as the company put it. The brand never fully recovered its shine. That one incident became a stain they couldn't scrub away. Other stores took notice. Staff were retrained. Policies were updated. All because one man chose to stand tall in the face of humiliation. Karma didn't just knock that day, it kicked down a wall. Months later, Marcus walked into a different luxury store, this time in another city. A young black employee greeted him with a warm smile. "Sir, let me know if you need anything." Marcus paused. "Thank you," he said, eyes softening. He didn't need to say more. Progress isn't loud, it shows up in subtle changes. In people. In spaces. In small acts of respect that echo louder than any apology. And as Marcus left that store, he knew. The world had shifted, even just a little. One evening, Marcus sat with his mentor, an older man who had seen far worse in his time. After hearing the full story, he nodded slowly and said, "You did what many of us couldn't. You stayed calm when the fire was hot." Marcus smiled faintly. "I wasn't calm inside," he admitted. His mentor chuckled. "That's what makes it powerful. You didn't let that fire burn the wrong things. You used it to light the truth." That conversation stayed with Marcus forever. A magazine reached out to feature Marcus's story under the headline, "Grace in the Face of Prejudice." He hesitated at first, he wasn't looking for fame. But then he thought of all the people who still walked into rooms unsure if they'd be accepted. So he agreed. The article went viral. Schools, companies, and even law enforcement agencies began using his story in workshops. His quiet stand had become a national conversation. Some people online accused Marcus of being too soft. He should have sued them, one tweet read. Why didn't he make them pay? But Marcus didn't respond. He knew something deeper, real change isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's lasting. The store lost business. The staff learned. The community talked. And hearts shifted. No lawsuit could have done all that. His power was in showing that respect, once demanded with rage, can also be earned through dignity. Weeks turned into months. Marcus was now mentoring young professionals, teaching them not just how to succeed, but how to stand firm when tested. He reminded them, don't just break barriers, teach people why those barriers should never exist in the first place. His sessions were raw, real, and unforgettable. Students left those rooms feeling taller. Not because of what they wore, but because of what they believed about themselves. At one workshop, a young girl raised her hand. What if they don't listen? She asked softly. Marcus leaned forward and answered, then speak louder. Not with your voice, but with your actions, your excellence, your integrity. The room went silent. It wasn't a quote for the wall, it was a lesson for life. And for the girl who asked, it was the first time she believed that her skin was not a burden, it was her strength. Marcus started receiving invitations from universities, nonprofits, even corporate panels. They didn't just want a speaker, they wanted his story. Not the viral headline, but the human truth behind it. He always began the same way: I wasn't trying to go viral. I was just trying to be treated like a person. That line always hit hardest. It stripped away the headlines, the applause, the fame, and reminded everyone what it was all about: simple, human dignity. One afternoon, Marcus visited his childhood neighborhood. Nothing had changed much, the same streets, the same corner stores. But kids ran up to him now, eyes wide, saying, "I saw you on YouTube." Or "You're that guy." He knelt down to speak with them eye to eye. "You can be anything," he told them. "Just don't let the world decide your worth." To them, he wasn't just a man in a suit, he was living proof that their dreams were possible. That night, Marcus looked through old journals, pages filled with pain, ambition, doubt. He smiled. Not because the journey had been easy, but because he had made it through. The pages reminded him of who he was before the world knew his name. And more importantly, before he fully believed in his own voice. He wasn't just telling a story anymore, he was becoming a storyteller for everyone who felt invisible. The luxury store's headquarters sent him a formal apology letter. Polished, carefully worded, corporate. Marcus read it once and set it aside. Apologies without accountability are just words. What mattered wasn't what they said, it was what they learned. And what the world saw. He never needed revenge. He needed change. And sometimes, the deepest change comes not when you burn bridges, but when you build new ones out of fire. Months later, a fashion startup offered Marcus a chance to launch his own brand, one rooted in inclusion, respect, and excellence. He didn't hesitate. He called it Legacy. Because this wasn't just about style, it was about the message stitched into every fabric: you belong here. The launch was simple. No flash. Just purpose. And it sold out in days. Not because of hype, but because people were ready to wear something that stood for something. The brand Legacy wasn't just clothing, it became a movement. Each tag had a message: your story has value. People posted pictures wearing it proudly, not for fashion, but for what it represented. A quiet revolution was unfolding, not in courtrooms or protests, but in people's choices. Every order Marcus shipped reminded him, this wasn't about ego. It was about healing. About reclaiming space in rooms that once closed their doors. One day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No name. Just 4 words: you changed my life. Inside was a photo of a young boy standing outside a luxury store, smiling, wearing Legacy. On the back, a short note: last year, I was scared to walk in. This year, I did. And I wasn't afraid. Marcus stared at it for a long time. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the quiet confirmation that his story was no longer his alone. Marcus sat on a rooftop one evening, overlooking the city skyline. A friend asked, "Do you ever wish it didn't happen, the store, the insult, the humiliation?" Marcus thought deeply before answering. "I wish the world didn't work that way. But I don't wish I stayed silent." That night, he realized something: growth often begins at the point of greatest discomfort. The pain became the soil. The story, the seed. At a conference overseas, Marcus was asked, "What would you tell the man who judged you that day?" He paused. The room leaned in. Then he said softly, "Thank you." Gasps. Whispers. He continued, "Because without that moment, I wouldn't have stepped into who I truly am. You tried to make me small. But you made me strong." The audience rose in applause, not because he had won, but because he had forgiven. Years passed. Marcus's brand expanded internationally. But he never forgot the moment that started it all. Sometimes, he would drive past the old luxury store, now replaced with a new name, new faces. One day, he walked by and saw a poster in the window, "We welcome all. Diversity is luxury." He smiled. Maybe they meant it. Maybe they didn't. But even so, the message was finally in the window, not locked behind the glass. One afternoon, Marcus was invited to speak at a school in a small town. He walked into a classroom full of young kids who looked at him like a superhero. "How did you stay so calm?" one boy asked. Marcus smiled gently and said, "Because if I lost control, they'd remember my anger, not their mistake." That moment stayed with the boy, and the teacher, long after the visit ended. Sometimes, strength doesn't roar. It simply stands still and doesn't break. The school later started a program called Walk In with Worth. It taught kids about confidence, respect, and identity. Marcus wasn't just the inspiration, he helped design the entire curriculum. "We don't need to teach kids how to fit in," he said during the launch. "We need to teach the world how to see them as they are." And with that, he created not just fashion, but foundation for a future he had once only dreamed of. A major network offered Marcus a TV deal. A documentary on his life. Cameras. Scripts. Fame. He declined. "Some stories aren't meant to be sold," he said. "They're meant to be felt." Instead, he produced a quiet film, a short piece, narrated in his own voice. It didn't go viral overnight. But the people who saw it? They carried it in their hearts. And that was enough. Impact wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was lasting. Years down the line, Marcus stood in front of a new building, his first community center. A space for youth, creatives, and dreamers of all backgrounds. Inside, on the main wall, hung the watch he never bought that day. Framed. Untouched. Below it, a plaque read, "Know your worth. Even when they don't." Every person who walked through those doors saw it. And many found their courage there, just as Marcus once had to find his. That same night, an older gentleman walked in. Hair gray, posture slow. He introduced himself. He was the former store owner. "I saw your center on the news," he said softly. "I needed to see it for myself." Marcus looked at him. He wasn't angry. He had outgrown anger. "I hope you've changed," Marcus said quietly. The man nodded, eyes glassy. "I think I have. And I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. And Marcus accepted it with a simple nod. After the former store owner left, Marcus stood alone in the hallway of the center. He looked up at the framed watch and let out a long breath. It was never about revenge. It was about returning with purpose. About building something stronger than what tried to break him. The past had come full circle, not with applause, but with quiet understanding. And that, Marcus realized, was more powerful than any spotlight could offer. The community center flourished. Young designers, writers, and speakers walked through its doors daily. One girl, barely 17, told Marcus, "I want to change the world like you did." He smiled and said, "Then start by changing how you see yourself." That day, she went home and applied to a program she once thought was out of reach. Months later, she got in. That's how Marcus's legacy lived on, not through him, but through the courage he passed on to others. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Marcus sat with his journal, one he hadn't touched in years. He wrote one sentence across the page, "Pain taught me purpose." It wasn't poetic. It was honest. The boy who once feared walking into a store now helped thousands walk into the world with pride. And he never forgot that it all started with a moment that tried to shame him. But instead awakened his calling. At a charity gala, Marcus was asked, "What does success mean to you now?" He thought carefully and replied, "Success is watching someone else bloom because you didn't give up on yourself." That answer was printed in newspapers the next day. But more importantly, it was printed in the minds of every young dreamer who had ever been told they didn't belong. Marcus wasn't just successful, he was significant. And there's a difference. Years from now, people may forget the viral video. They might not remember the name of the store or the apology that came too late. But they'll remember the man who stood tall without raising his voice. The man who wore dignity like armor. The man who didn't just fight racism, he rewrote the rules. Because Marcus didn't just want justice. He wanted change. And now, that change had a heartbeat. Marcus stood on the stage of his own foundation's anniversary event. Hundreds were in the crowd, mentors, students, supporters, even strangers who had once seen his story online. He didn't prepare a long speech. Just a moment of truth. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," he said. "I was just trying to be treated like a man. And now I help others be seen for who they truly are." The audience rose to their feet, not because he was famous, but because he was real. The lights dimmed, and a video montage played, young kids smiling in legacy clothing, workshops filled with laughter, parents saying thank you, neighborhoods being rebuilt. Marcus watched quietly from the side. He had never needed credit. Just impact. What started as a painful moment in a store had grown into a movement. One that healed, inspired, and transformed. A reminder that dignity denied is temporary, but dignity reclaimed? That echoes forever. Later that night, Marcus walked outside alone. The city hummed softly in the distance. He looked up at the stars, not for answers, but for peace. He thought of that first day, the rejection, the humiliation. And then everything that came after, the rising, the rebuilding, the redemption. He whispered to himself, "Thank you for not letting me shrink." The wind picked up, almost like the universe heard him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt completely whole. This story isn't just Marcus's anymore. It's everyone's who has ever been judged before being known, silenced before being heard, or excluded before being welcomed. It's a story about what happens when you choose grace over rage, purpose over pride. Because in the end, Marcus didn't just walk back into that store. He walked into history. And left the door wide open for everyone else to follow.